Hare Krishna, Om Namo Shivaya, einen schönen guten Abend an alle Zuschauer zum Live-Talk League of Yogis mit dem interessanten Thema Yoga und Weltanschauung. Es ist mir eine große Freude, heute Abend einen ganz besonderen Gast zu begrüßen, nämlich Dr. Janne Kontala, aka Jayananda Das, mein lieber Freund. Schönen guten Abend.
Guten Abend.
Also es hat jetzt leider nicht mit Live-Übertragung funktioniert, aber ihr könnt auch im Nachhinein eure Fragen stellen und das Interview wird jetzt auf Englisch stattfinden und werden versuchen auch dann mit Untertiteln das zu versehen. So Jayananda Prabhu, very happy to have you as a guest.
Well, this was a very simple way of making you happy, so agreeing to be online.
Very nice. So we are not also having so often English-speaking guests, so this is also something new in our live talks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You never had an English-speaking guest before?
I'm not sure. I think this is the first time.
All right.
To have premiere.
Why not do anything for once and see what happens?
Yes. Jayananda Prabhu, I would just like to open the whole session with something about yourself, about your like spiritual and material career. You started kind of like a Bhakti yogi, and then you went and became a yoga teacher, and then finally, if I'm right, please correct me, you became a doctor of science in religious studies.
Humanities, social sciences. Yeah, humanities. That's correct.
Yeah. So this all fits in,
because it fits in. Except I kind of started my yoga journey, if you will, by reading a book on Hatha yoga that was given to me by my table tennis trainer. I was into table tennis. In fact, I spent one whole year living in Germany practicing table tennis 2 times a day, but that was long ago, so I kind of prefer to keep this in English. But anyway, so I read the book and got impressed that, hey, this looks interesting. But then at the same time, I was spending so much of my time just practicing sports that I kind of figured out that I will take into yoga later. And then after a couple of years, when I put my table tennis bat on a shelf, then I picked up yoga, tried out. So I recall first yoga exercise I ever learned was a headstand, because it was so much praised in the book. And of course, it was a little difficult, but I thought, well, anyway, sounds like an interesting challenge. So I practiced every day and it took me 1 month. But that was my start. That's how I got started.
Very interesting.
I did fall a couple of times when I was practicing my headstand. Then, later on, when I was practicing the asanas and I discovered that, hey, this works, something is happening, something is difficult to explain, but I think all yogis have this experience. Like, you can't really explain to someone else how a banana tastes. You just have to put it in your mouth. So something like that happened. And then I started, what more is there in the world of yoga? And then I started exploring meditation and try different techniques. A friend of mine kind of talked me to trying out mantra meditation, and that was a Bhakti yoga part. And I was kind of convinced that there's no way there can be any point in this that other than one of the billions of ways of calming down your mind, if you will. So finally I tried it out just in order to prove my friend that, I tried it out. There's nothing special about it. But then after making the experiment, I kind of concluded, well, I was wrong. This is really powerful stuff. Then it took a few months. I was kind of struggling, trying to keep this off. I don't want this kind of super powerful stuff into my life. But then on the other hand, I want. because that's why I was doing yoga anyway, to have some kind of inner transformation. But when it was started taking place, the first impression, oh, this is going too fast. But anyway, after some months, I kind of surrendered and took it as my daily practice, and have been doing it ever since for, I don't know how long now, 28 years. Okay. That's a long time. But okay, then I moved into an ashram to practice Bhakti Yoga full time, but I never gave up my Hatha Yoga practice. I just went on with it on a daily basis and have been doing it ever since. And right now, because I'm teaching yoga a lot, both like physical form and then meditation, devotional practices, philosophy of yoga. And I have a feeling right now that there are two distinct communities, those who are into the mantras and spiritual side, and those who are into asanas and pranayama. And sometimes you have one person doing both, but quite often it's like one or the other. And I've been living with both worlds, in both worlds all the time. And I kind of feel that this group of practitioners would benefit if they just added a little bit from this side. And the same thing maybe with Bhakti Yogis and, you know, yoga philosophers. It might be good for them to do something a little bit with their body. Anyway, I got sidetracked.
I'm always thinking about Bodhidharma. Was this the first missionary, Buddhist missionary in China? And he also had the experience that the monks were always meditating and getting sick. So then he started to introduce some exercises from yoga, and that's the way how Qigong developed, and Tai Chi and all these things.
Yeah, but it just makes sense because the body is made to move and work. That's why we have muscles. And then, okay, one form of violence if you're working too hard and hurting yourself. But there's another form of violence, is like if you're totally neglecting the basic, you know, motor functions and muscles and everything. So because then they just go into a really bad shape. And ultimately, how do you sit even in meditation if you don't have core muscles to, you know, hold the spine erect?
Yeah. I'm also thinking about just that if you overdo, this is more like a rajas, like passion. And if you just sit and not move your body in a healthy way, that's more like tamasic, more like bringing some disease and ignorance and like this.
Yeah, one can get sidetracked in many different ways. I'm thinking about Yoga Sutra now, just thinking about what you just said. So Yoga Sutra has a first chapter, as probably most listeners or whoever is watching know. So first chapter is called Samadhipada. So that's pretty much straightforward. Sit down and still your mind and like that. And then the second chapter starts kind of responding to the inquiry that some readers might have. What about me? Like, I'm not really ready to sit down and enter into Samadhi yet. I have a lot of active energy. And then it's a whole different program. It starts with Kriya Yoga, and then later on Ashtanga Yoga is introduced. But it's like active energy, if we have it, it's not a problem, but it needs to be dealt with. And there are yogic tools to do it. Like, it doesn't go away just by imagining that I wish I didn't have it and I wish I had a Samadhi mind. Anyway, at least for those people, which I think is 99.9% of the total population on Earth, they do need some kind of active practice.
Definitely, that's my experience too.
Yeah,
very interesting. But mentioning Yoga Sutra, coming back more also to our topic, you translated Yoga Sutras, and you also wrote the commentaries. So
I wrote a commentary, but it's in Finnish, so it's kind of probably incomprehensible to most. But
so what was your motivation? Because there we know that there are so many editions of Yoga Sutra. What is making this distinct from the others, if we can say so?
From one point of view, there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm not so crazy that I think that I have something to add to the 1,500-year-old commentarial tradition. All the important things have been said. So I took it as my task to kind of build a bridge from where most of the modern day yoga practitioners are now to the world that Patanjali is describing in his sutras. Because when you read the sutras and its traditional commentaries, I think it becomes very clear that these texts were not really written with the modern day yogis in mind. They were not primarily, the primary target audience of this book and the commentaries is not a person who has an address, job, family, and hobbies. These texts are for full-time ascetics.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then I was thinking, like, there's a lot of brilliant, like, information about how the mind works, and a lot of practices, exercises, and if you figure out or translate them, how to apply them, you know, there are principles and practices. If you understand the principle, then you can modify the practice to suit your situation right now. So that was kind of my program, not changing anything, just being fully faithful to the tradition, but at the same time, without editing out anything, like then writing here and then some suggestions about how to apply this if you are kind of a normal person today who is not living in a cave.
Very good, very good.
So like that, by doing that, I'm certainly not the only one in the world who approach the text like that. So maybe if I have any strength and not only weaknesses as a yoga teacher, then it's like the double combination. I'm fond of classic texts. I do study them on a daily basis, have been doing it for like decades. So
Okay.
I kind of, the texts speak to me, they inspire me. But at the same time, you know, I'm a normal person. I have a job, I have a family. I'm teaching yogis who are in the similar situation. So I can also relate to what it is like to live a normal life in the contemporary secular world, and then trying to bring these two worlds together.
Excellent, excellent. I like this approach very much. And now coming to our today's topic, yoga and worldview. So how I came with this title is because you also, I don't know if you authored or co-authored a paper at Abo Academy University in Finland, where you did your doctor thesis also, called Emerging Non-Religious Worldview Prototypes.
Yeah.
And then I found this really interesting. And I was thinking, okay, worldview and yoga, how this fits together. Is there worldview in yoga? Is there only one, or there are more worldviews? And of course, especially because you have been studying and I have been studying Bhagavad-gita as one of the major yoga texts for so many years. What would be the worldview of Bhagavad-gita?
Okay. So there's a lot of stuff. And you presented a number of questions, not only one. But if we start with worldview of yoga, or are there many worldviews of yoga? So can we start with that, maybe?
Yes, yes.
So as I think at least many German people know, the origins of the term worldview is in Immanuel Kant's thought. He introduced the term Weltanschauung. But for Kant, it just meant like how all people pretty much basically perceive the world. Like there's the idea being that here's a subject and there's a world, and in between me and the world as it really is my perception of it. And there's no way how you can go beyond your perception to the real world. The real world is out there somewhere, but you cannot really access it because your perception is in between. So for Kant, Weltanschauung stood for our human perception of reality. But then, as it often happens, the concept took a life of its own, and it was translated as worldview in English, and it has been theorized in many different ways. So what worldview means depends on your worldview. People use this term differently. Some people are referring to, a particular way of seeing the world and our place in the world, which is typical for a particular culture or maybe a historical era. And other theorists, when they use the word worldview, they mean how I see the world, which is distinct from how you see the world, which is distinct from the third person. So everyone has their own individual worldview. Okay, so now that would be a topic for an infinitely long discussion, like the different perspectives and what are the strengths and weaknesses of each. But let's move to yoga now, because there's a corresponding word in Indian philosophy, which has a kind of similar connotation to worldview. It's called darshan. So students of Yoga Sutra know that Patanjali calls Purusha, the soul, the self, also as a seer, one who sees. Okay? And then there's darshan, which is related to seeing. So we could say yoga represents a particular viewpoint, how to view, but not really the world, but the Vedic revelation, how the world is explained in the sacred Vedic texts. There you have the four Vedas, then you have the Upanishads, and then you have additional literature like Itihasa, Purana, and so on. It's huge, the Vedic literature.
Right.
So Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is a well-known approach. It's a darshan, one way of looking at the Vedic revelation. So when we talk about yoga as a distinct worldview, then I guess it would be appropriate to refer to Patanjali because he gave a name to one darshan, one of the 6 main darshanas in Indian philosophy. But then yoga, it's not only a philosophical school, it also obviously refers to a practice. Mm-hmm. And what kind of practice? Yoga refers to a systematic methodology which you can apply in your own life in order to improve your perception of reality. So here we come to a place where yoga kind of agrees with Immanuel Kant. Yeah, there's something in between us and the real world. But yoga seems to claim that there is a way of going beyond whatever stands in between. If you are willing to train your mind and senses, kind of fine-tune them in order to see reality as it is.
Okay, so, that's very, very, very interesting. So
yeah,
it's giving a tool.
Like, yeah, it's a tool. So yoga as a practice to refine one's perception, how could we bring our perception of reality as close as possible to the actual reality? So that's the role of yoga as a practice, and as such, yoga is accepted all over the place, not only by Patanjali, but like you mentioned Bhagavad-gita. Every chapter of the 18 chapters of Bhagavad-gita in a commentarial tradition has been entitled as something yoga. This yoga, that yoga, 18 different types of yogas. So yoga is definitely all over the place in Bhagavad-gita. It's accepted in Vedanta. So I would almost like to say that of the major schools of Indian thought, which are still alive and well today, there's only one that comes to my mind, which really seems to have a little bit different approach than yoga, which is not even that much applying the practices that we would call yoga, which is the mimamsa. Mm-hmm. More about rituals and doing good deeds and assembling good karma. But yoga as a philosophical school and as an ascetic tradition tends to reject the project of accumulating good karma and going to a good place in the next life, maybe a heavenly world, because it's seen as temporary. You are still suffering from the same misconception, which causes all the suffering, thinking that you yourself are the center of everything. So that's a root cause of deep ignorance. One needs to remove that ignorance in order to see things clearly and have a clear, direct perception of reality. So, but other than that, in Vedanta, yoga itself, and Sankhya, these are kind of closely related. And yoga as a practice would be relevant to all of these schools. Okay.
So you mentioned yoga, Vedanta, Samkhya, Karma, Mimamsa. So these are six darshanas that we know.
These are four of the six darshanas.
Yeah.
Then you have Nyaya and Vaisesika. It's not that they are totally extinct, but most of their ideas have been absorbed to the other schools to the extent that I think it would be too much to say that they don't exist anymore, but they don't have the same kind of dominant position today as they probably used to have.
And probably practical application too.
Yeah, practical application. But like coming back to your question, are there many worldviews of yoga? Then it kind of depends what kind of practices and in which school it's being applied. So as we know, for instance, if you take Vedanta is not one school. It's subdivides into many different sub-schools. So only in the Vedanta, if you try to understand what's the worldview of Vedanta, and then you are using yoga as a tool to kind of understand things that the theory of that school says, it turns out that all of these have different nuances. They don't really have one and the same philosophy. So is there one unifying principle in all the different schools that are somehow interested in yoga? So I've been thinking about that a lot, because then aside these six schools or darsans, then you have a later development. Then you have Hatha yoga in the medieval period, which is all about how to control the prana and by that make the mind peaceful. And that's yet another approach. And also, like, the most famous Hatha Yoga book, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, is well known for being like a real mix of different philosophies thrown into the same book. You know, so it doesn't present a concise Hatha Yoga philosophy. It's kind of combining elements from many different sources. So it seems to me that the common element in all different approaches to yoga is that there's some kind of understanding that our real identity is not based on our body and not based on our mind either. There's something more. We are something more than the limitations of our mind and body. So I think that would be a common denominator for all approaches, that there's an eternal self, whether it's all-pervading cosmic consciousness, whether it's an atomic individual self, whatever it is, it's distinct from how we perceive ourselves right now. And it continues to exist after the body dies. And it's a desirable objective to learn to know the true self, however it is conceived. So that would be one common denominator of all the different approaches. Like all different worldviews of yoga, I think, would agree on that. Another thing they would agree on is that the pursuit, trying to be happy by enjoying the senses, chasing temporary pleasures, and the counterside of that coin, the other side of the same coin, is by trying to avoid misery, by eliminating sources of suffering, will not really ever lead to a permanent place of satisfaction. And why not? Because the main instrument in all systems of yoga, really, at the center of yoga practice, is the mind. So if you're programming your mind to think that if I achieve something which is not present right now, if I need to change something in the universe to be happy, then basically you are programming into your mind the idea that doesn't matter how things are, you won't be satisfied, because that's what you are practicing. I need to change something. So now you are imprinting in your mind the idea that you need to change something. And the idea will be there ghosting you when you get what you want, but the idea I need to change something is still there, because that's what you have been cultivating.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all different approaches to yoga would kind of agree that this is a dead end. You need to do something different with your mind. You need to calm down your mind. So I'd say like all approaches to yoga would be in some kind of general agreement on that.
I'm just shortly thinking about this what you said about the mind. I mean, Yoga Sutra is offering very radical proposal to finally shut down the mind.
Yeah, it does. So yeah, in the second sutra, like you start reading the book, like, oh, what's Yoga Sutra all about? What's this business about yoga? So first sutra is kind of like, okay, now it's time to study yoga, learn yoga now, because I guess because you bought this book or because you got a human life and you can ask such questions. Then right away, the second sutra says, yoga citta vritti nirodha. Yoga means stopping the mind. Wow. Like, hey, I'm not really sure I want to go that way. Fortunately, Vyasa, in the oldest and most important commentary, explains that, you don't have to be that extreme right away. It's in fact possible. You can kind of distinguish between samadhi with an object, which means your mind is almost closed down. There's only one thought. That's samadhi with an object. Only one thought is there. And then the samadhi without object, when the consciousness resides in its own nature, then that's just totally shut down. So that's a yoga.
This last thought, I don't actually need this mind. I can exist without this material mind.
Yeah. Another important commentary to Yoga Sutra ascribed to Sankara. It was discovered quite late, I think like 100 years ago, something like that. Anyway, Sankara's commentary to Yoga Sutra introduced this idea that the last thought in the mind of a yogi who wants to totally close down the mind is that I want to end all thinking. And this is the last thought. And Sankara explains it's like a candle. When you light a candle and there's a flame is there, but it's only a matter of time that it burns out all the fuel and then it kind of ceases to exist. So similarly, this last thought to end all thought is something like that. Okay, I think why it sounds scary is because we are so much identifying with the mind that it's very hard for us to imagine that there could be any kind of conscious life, existence without the mind. However, fortunately, we all fall asleep in every 24-hour period and experience something like how it is to exist without active mind when we enter the deep sleep. So it gives us a hint. So objective samadhi is a little bit like that in terms that the mind is totally shut, but instead of you being totally like in a blackout condition, now you're totally awake. Anyway,
nice.
that's a Yoga Sutra stuff. It's emphasizing very much stilling the mind and finally closing it totally. But it does introduce other paths as well. They are maybe not as well known, but I could imagine that some of your previous guests have discussed that. So then I'm not sure if it's interesting for you to dwell into that.
Yeah.
Or is it?
We discussed already quite some things about the mind. Yeah, and how to deal with it, and about the consciousness like this. But because, of course, Yoga Sutras are very interesting, but because our topic is yoga and Weltanschauung.
Yeah.
So perhaps coming back to that, what
Yeah,
can
let's
you
get back
say
to
about
Weltanschauung.
Weltanschauung in Bhagavad-gita?
Yeah. Okay. So Bhagavad-gita is layered. Some students of Bhagavad-gita, it seems to me, get confused because it presents so many different approaches and ideas. But when you study the whole text, it turns out that they are interconnected. This kind of, for instance, when it comes to yoga in Bhagavad-gita, it's well known that Bhagavad-gita explains many systems of yoga. Karma yoga, of course. Arjuna is in anxiety, and he's raising this question right in the beginning, that wouldn't it be better for me to live by begging, which is clearly making a reference to taking up the role of an ascetic yogi, because they used to live by begging. So Arjuna is kind of indirectly raising the argument that instead of me fighting on this battlefield, wouldn't it be better, because now I'm getting entangled with karmic reactions, and by the way, it's not a nice thing to engage in violent fight and kill people like that. All of these are natural sentiments. But I find it very interesting that he kind of, right in the beginning, one of his arguments seems to be that wouldn't it be better for me to leave the world and live as a yogi, aiming at, just stilling the mind all the way, as Patanjali is teaching. And then interestingly, Krishna does address that question, particularly in the 6th chapter. 6th chapter is where I think it's an educated guess to say that it's quite likely that this has influenced Patanjali's presentation in Yoga Sutra. There are many signs which indicate that he studied Bhagavad-gita well. Anyway, whatever the case, in 6th chapter, Krishna is explaining in detail what it means to practice something like the Ashtanga Yoga explained in the Yoga Sutras. Now, after hearing the whole story, what does Arjuna say? Oh, this is really hard. I don't think I can do this. Seems like controlling the mind is more difficult than controlling the wind. And then the next sutra is so fascinating. You would expect that your teacher says, oh, come on, it's not that difficult. No, that's not at all what Krishna says. He says, oh yeah, you are right. It is that difficult, but it can be done. But it requires practice and detachment. And then Arjuna kind of seems to realize, yeah, and it sounds like it requires a lot of practice, a long time. So what if I don't complete this in one lifetime? And Krishna says, yeah, but then you can continue in the next lifetime. So it's a multi-lifetime project. But interestingly, when Krishna finally responds to Arjuna's concern that wouldn't it be better for me to kind of sit down and meditate and live an ascetic life, when he hears all the details about what is involved, he concludes that, no, that's too much. But at the same time, so is there an option? And most of Bhagavad-gita is presenting that option. So if you go to the 4th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, there's a very interesting verse, number 24. I'm sure you know it. So I'm not going to read the Sanskrit, but I would like to point out the last line of that verse, 4.24, what it says. Because it's talking about how sacrifice has a, performing a ritual sacrifice has a means of transforming both the person who is performing the sacrifice, the ingredients of the sacrifice, and the whole process. Everything will be spiritualized. The word Brahma is repeated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in one verse. But the last line, that's fascinating. It says, Brahma karma samadhina. So it's saying, by performing sacrifice, which is, you're taking an active role. You are doing something. You have a purpose. It's not that you are sitting down and you have only one thought. Sacrifices require action. So Krishna is in this verse talking about Brahma karma samadhi. So first there's the word karma, which means action. So how can you connect karma and samadhi? That's a question. Because if you read Yoga Sutra, you would draw the conclusion it's not possible because it has to be totally still. But here Krishna is talking about something else. Karma connected to samadhi. Now, how is that done? You need the third word, Brahma, Brahman. So you need to figure out how in the context of action, you somehow or other bring in a transcendent referent. You are not doing it because you want to be happy or you want to be successful, but because you are seeing yourself as a part of a greater whole. So that's the whole idea. Because action, karma, the process of karma is binding only as long as I think that I'm doing this because the results belong to me.
Right.
Right. Because people are talking about mindfulness, and mind presence is mostly the word is used kind of in a passive sense. You're just being still and receiving perceptions and, accepting them as they are. Being present in the now, right? How about mindfulness in the context of action? So what spoils the whole thing? Why can't we usually practice mindfulness in the context of action? Because we're all the time thinking that we are projecting our mind to the future instead of being present in the here and now, doing our very best, because this is our chance to contribute to the whole universe. I can do the greatest contribution right now if I just fully focus and do my best. But instead I'm thinking, I hope people will see how well I did and praise me. Or maybe it's the opposite. Whatever I'm doing, I'm thinking, oh, this is so boring. I wish it was finished already. In both cases, instead of being present and doing your best, you're projecting your mind to the result, whatever it is, which spoils the whole mindfulness.
Right.
Now, if you manage to be mindful, present right now, and understanding, I'm not doing this for me at all. I'm doing this for the pleasure of the Supreme, which is bringing in the Brahman aspect to it. Then the activity itself ceases to cause bondage. And now it turns out you can have an active mind because you are engaged in an activity. Means you need to consider everything that plays a role in that activity. You cannot think about only one thing. You probably have to think about many things, but you're fully focused on those many things because you want to do your very best. Means you have an intensely active mind, but in the right way, in order to do your best. And your body is active, your prana is moving, but because the purpose is the right kind of purpose, your motivation is, it's the right kind of motivation, then what will be stored in your mind? Now back to the mind, the topic of Yoga Sutra. I won't be now storing sanskaras which are related to how great I am, what will I get out of this? This is what sustains the ignorance. I'm storing sanskaras which are like, okay, I'm doing my service to the Supreme right now. So whatever I'm doing, there are many kinds of contents in the mind, but there's a kind of common subtext to all of them, that this is for the pleasure of the Supreme. I'm not the center of everything. I'm just serving the center. And bringing this in, then whatever enters your mind will be of the right kind of quality, the spiritual content. So now your own life, your own activity transforms into a sacred narrative. Bhakti yogis know there's one interesting way samadhi practice, it's in fact described that way in Bhagavata Purana. because Bhagavata Purana is explaining a very Bhakti-centered version of Ashtanga Yoga in the 3rd book, in the 28th chapter. It's talking about Leela Smaranam, Vaikuntha Leela Smaranam, thinking about the wonderful activities of the Supreme, which are totally free of the karmic bondage. But the interesting thing, in this Brahma Karma Samadhi, you can even participate in that Leela if you are in the right kind of mindset. And then whatever you are doing, because you are trying your best, that becomes part, it's a kind of sacred narrative of your own life when you get rid of your selfishness and ignorance.
Wow. You said so many wonderful things, wonderful
Yeah.
concepts. So I'm just trying now to summarize, and I'm just thinking, okay, what would be really again the main benefit, just to summarize that, of this approach against other approaches?
Okay, so it's not that one size fits all feet. People really have different size feet, and they need different kinds of shoes. But the benefit of this approach is the same benefit as is beneficial for Arjuna. Namely, he was a warrior, he was a passionate man, but he was pure in heart. He had a serious interest of doing the right thing. Okay, so if you recognize yourself from the description that at least sometimes I want to do the right thing, even though it may be hard, and if I notice that most of my waking hours I am anyway spending doing things other than sitting down in meditation. You know, we have 24 hours, let's say I sleep 7 hours, 17 hours left. Every moment of wakefulness is a means to train the mind for the better or worse. So really, if one gets serious with yoga, one needs to consider that all the choices throughout the day are part of the greater program of transforming the mind. So let's say you sit down in meditation 7 hours, and that's a lot. You would still spend 9 hours doing something else. And the quality of that 9 hours, if you don't pay attention to what you do, would then override the effects of the meditation, because you are doing a different kind of programming, even more hours than your 7 hours. You see?
I see.
So this approach of Bhagavad-gita is relevant if you are serious about yoga, and if you know this is natural for me to spend at least half or even more of my waking hours in some kind of activity, active work, then Bhagavad-gita tells you, okay, but this is how you can transform it. It's not that you first have to give up the world and then progress in yoga, but you need to figure out how to bring yoga into your life outside of the yoga mat. And Bhagavad-gita tells us how to do it.
Wow. That's a great approach. And it's really, really practical for modern times.
Yeah, and it historically also, like, sometimes I get the impression some people, they read all the yoga texts, then they are taking a look what's going on in the world of yoga today, and they think, oh, this is unrecognizable. This is very different from what I read in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. My response is, guess what? Do you think Patanjali was mainstream back then? Definitely not, you know.
Definitely
maybe a
not,
little bit more mainstream than today, but it's always been like only very few practitioners who walk that path all the way. So one way to combine the approaches of Bhagavad-gita, which is telling us how to bring yoga into our daily life, and then the principles of Patanjali, which emphasizing more about what you do on your private time, in your stillness of your own mind at your own private time, is that you utilize the idea that in every day there are different kinds of periods which reflect the three modes, tamas, rajas, and sattva, in different ways. So because early morning is a sattva time, So that's suitable for doing Patanjali stuff. And then 9 to 5, which is Rajasic time, please go to work and then apply Bhagavad-gita at that time. So you can combine them. Early morning, that's a good time for Patanjali approach. Then you kind of prepare your mind to be ready to face the challenges of the life, of the world, which there are plenty of. And then apply, the way I see it is mind is like an instrument. So Patanjali tells us how to fine-tune the instrument, and Bhagavad-gita tells us how to play the music in the context of our daily life.
Mm-hmm. So we need on one side potent spiritual practice, which will make our mind also strong and focused, and then we have to apply it in daily life.
Exactly.
But there must be also, like, I'm thinking about like sportsmen or some performers, like music performers, who really have a big attention to achieve something. They have to be very focused in that what they are doing. They really have to be present in what they are doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise the performance will not work. But here we see this special ingredient that is bringing us to another level. We're like founder Acharya of International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, said that we have to re-spiritualize all what we are doing, just to have this special connection where whatever we are doing, it's becoming a kind of perfect, because we are bringing this spiritual component in.
Yeah.
So that's great conclusion actually, and bring these two worlds together, like this classical Ashtanga yoga and then more of karma yoga components.
Yeah.
And solving Arjuna's dilemma also.
Yeah. Arjuna went on with his yoga practice after hearing Bhagavad-gita by shooting arrows in thousands, all the while practicing yoga. So I think one of the lessons of the story of Bhagavad-gita, or the great Mahabharata, of which is part, I think, is that, well, if it is indeed possible to bring the principles of yoga even into the context of a battlefield, I think it's difficult to find a more stressful situation. So you cannot really use it as an excuse. Oh, my life is so stressful, I cannot really make advancement in yoga. Bhagavad-gita seems to tell us it's almost the opposite, that these are the greatest opportunities when you are really facing hard time. Then you can also like bring out the best side of yourself. Of course it's difficult, but yoga was never easy. Doesn't matter which approach, it's always difficult. It's always the greatest challenge.
So I'm thinking also about one statement of Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, where he said, well, material life without spiritual component is difficult. Or no, he said, spiritual life is difficult. Yoga practice is difficult. But material life without spiritual life is impossible.
Yeah, it's a struggle. I think this reminds me of, I have heard many times this idea, people go to maybe to a yoga retreat or meditation retreat for a day or a week or two. You feel like blissed out. You're so peaceful, and it seems everything is so easy. And then after that, you go home and it's all gone. Where is all that peace? And it's true that when you engage in intense practice in a guarded, like a safe environment, like an ashram on a retreat, then you can taste what it would be like to have a lot of time to spend on spiritual practice. But at the same time, the real job of yoga takes place in the unconscious mind when we are dealing with our sanskaras, our hidden tendencies, which are just waiting for the moment to steal away our attention, like attacking us from behind the corner. So if you have a huge dose of sattva, nice association, peaceful environment, a lot of meditation, then the sattvic sanskaras that you are now engaging with will temporarily overpower the old stuff, but they don't destroy them. They are just there, and then they pop up again. And then you wonder, where did it come from? Mm-hmm. Well, it was there all the time. It didn't disappear. It was just temporarily covered over. So the idea that, spiritual life is easy, material life is tough. I think there's a point. It's not that I'm in disagreement, but at the same time, when we engage in our spiritual practice, we do have to struggle with our sanskaras if you want to do away with them. It's not that the day you start your spiritual journey, all of it will be gone in the next day. Usually it's a lifelong struggle. So let's compare, let's have two lifelong struggles. The spiritual struggle of walking the path of whichever practice you are doing and trying to really deal with your lower self, your bad tendencies, trying to do the right thing, failing every now and then, falling down on the path, hopefully falling forward and then getting up and walking forward. I mean, undoubtedly it's a struggle. I've been practicing for almost 3 decades now that I don't remember it being easy, even one day, But the other thing is that what if you don't take up the spiritual practice? You're still dealing with the same stuff. And now dealing with the same stuff, with the same samskaras, as a result of walking the path without the spiritual component. Now compare these two paths in the end of your life. If you walk the spiritual path, it means you cultivated a lot of sanskaras which will make things easier in the future. And you probably did some practices as well, which kind of clean away some of the really nasty stuff. Whereas if you had just the same amount of struggle without the spiritual component, then you did not cultivate sanskaras which will make your life easier in the future. And you also did not remove any of your old stuff. So I know that when we have new people who want to take up the practice of yoga, practice of meditation, bhakti, it's good to say that, okay, this will be a good option. Things will get better. And it's true. But at the same time, once the person is serious, I think we also need to bring in the news that, but it won't be that easy yet. Just be prepared for a lifetime of practice and struggle. Anyway, that's my experience, honestly.
Yeah, but of course we understand that in that way we are trying to, because like on the material level with all these struggles, we can become materially more competent. But then again, we understand the whole science of rebirth, and reincarnation and like this. So this is not really bringing the final solution. So yoga is offering tools really to through the struggle, to stop the struggle at one point.
Yeah.
Because struggle is definitely there. We cannot, as we can see, we cannot avoid it. But then what is the final solution?
Yeah, exactly.
Very nice. Well, this was really a lot of food for thoughts. I will have to really to go through it in my next morning meditation to digest all these, a lot of nice ideas and concepts. I would just like to somehow to wrap it a little bit. So if I understood you correctly about yoga and worldview, so the common denominator for all the yoga schools would be that we have something more and something beyond just this body and the senses, some eternal self, which is there to be discovered or uncovered. Yoga practice. So this will be like the worldview of yoga, that there is something transcendental or transcendent beyond the senses.
Right. And as a part of the process of moving towards that direction, I think all approaches to yoga would agree that there's a price to pay. You really have to be willing to give up a lot of the sources of what you would otherwise be considering as the fun stuff. You know, but it's not that, okay, we are throwing this away and then that's suffering, and after 500 lifetimes there will be a moment of bliss. There's also the principle of higher taste. So giving up something will be replaced quite soon with some kind of inner realization and experience, which makes it worthwhile even before you are in the end of the journey. But anyway, so I think that's important. I forgot to mention that some kind of skeptical attitude towards sense gratification and, you know, totally hedonistic materialistic life would be, I think, common feature in all approaches.
Yes, to giving up the lower to reach the higher in a certain sense. Yeah, very nice. So Jayananda probably also author of the book on yoga called Inner Yoga. Can you tell us at the end a little bit about your book?
Yeah, it started, I opened my own yoga school in 2002. I had been teaching before, but that was the first time I started doing it on a daily basis and often many times a day. And then I started getting students, and some were very serious, and they asked me, is there any good book that you could recommend? And then I noticed I was hesitant because there are many books which explain the practices that you would do in a normal yoga class in a quite a nice way. But then the philosophical side, I was not really satisfied with that. Then on the other hand, you have these kind of classics of yoga philosophy, which are philosophically brilliant. They are full of deep wisdom, but somehow often very hard to study if you don't have background. So I was kind of thinking that most students I have, most practitioners I encounter, they need some kind of combination of the both worlds in order to, you know, get the best from both worlds. And then I thought about it for some years, looked around, and then I decided, okay, if I don't find anything, I have to do it. So I wrote a book. So I have a sandwich, like a, are you allowed to say the word hamburger in this show? Vegan hamburger, you know.
Okay, then.
Is that okay? So you have bread in the bottom, bread on the top, and in between some stuff. So the in between stuff in the middle of the book, I'm just explaining the basic asana and breathing exercises that you need to support your spiritual practice. But I'm explaining both of these, both breathing and asanas, from a spiritual point of view, because what is your underlying thought process in whatever you are doing will influence the result. Not only the material, tangible result, but the psychological result. What kind of experience and tendency are you cultivating? So even those practices which are kind of more mainstream on modern day yoga, I'm trying to bring the spiritual component because I find it's all important. And at least because that's not so much prominent in other books, then I can do that. In the beginning of the book, the lower part of the bread is the philosophical introduction to the yoga journey. Okay, so that you have kind of right kind of orientation, or to my mind, the kind of orientation that I find valuable. Yoga as a process of self and God realization, not only as a process of feeling more relaxed next Tuesday. And then in the end, the last third of the book is then all about introducing the most powerful tools that one can use. In sacred texts, the word dharma is being used. Now, we know dharma works on very many different levels. It could refer to the 5 yamas, sanatana dharma, universal principles. It could refer to svadharma, what is my particular duty in terms of my occupation or family. But then there's also paradharma, paramadharma. What is the duty of the soul? So the most spiritual, deepest part of dharma. Now it turns out that the deepest, most spiritual part of dharma is explained. There are many options, and it depends on the time. And I'm not talking if it's summer or winter, but historical times. So right now, we are living in the midst of a time where distractions are prominent and disagreements are prominent. Yes. It's very hard to find time to focus on deep meditative practices. And for that reason, for this age, the particular spiritual practice which represents the center, the deepest, the highest part of Dharma, the Yoga Dharma, is reciting mantras consisting of the holy names of the Supreme. So I'm spending the last part of the book explaining how to bring that into the yoga practice that you already have, and then how to proceed on that path, and what are the obstacles you will encounter, and like that. So that's in a nutshell.
Very good, very good. So perhaps at the end, could you say a mantra to close the session?
Okay, yeah. My favorite way of concluding a teaching session is a prayer or mantra of wishing well to all living entities. So this prayer by Prahlad, the child saint yogi, who was praying for the benefit of his father right after the father tried to kill him. So very pure, selfless love without any conditions towards everyone, all beings. And so then he's reciting these prayers in the 5th canto of Bhagavata Purana, 5th book, where he's wishing well, let all beings be happy by giving up their envy, friction, malice that they feel towards one another. And how to get there? By fixing their mind on the Supreme who is beyond the scope of the senses, adhoksaja. So wonderful. That's the translation. Here comes the mantra. Swastyastu vishvasya kala prasiratam Dhiyayantu bhutani shivang mithoriya Manascha badram bhajatar harokshaje Aveshyatang no matirapya haituki.
That was very nice. Thank you for that, Jayananda Prabhu. And in conclusion, so my understanding would now be that worldview of yoga would be actually the worldview of the soul, or from the point of the soul, and in that sense we can speak about Atma Darshana,
yeah,
or having darshan, having direct perception of the soul, which is again the conclusion of Yoga Sutra of Patanjali.
Yeah,
that we have to purify our consciousness through our yoga practice, and this would be the final exam and the final proof where we can see the self, ourself.
Yeah, you nailed it.
By your blessings and association and inspiration. So it was very, very nice evening for me. Thank you so much, Jayananda Prabhu, or Dr. Janne Kontala, yoga teacher from original from Finland, but you are based in Sweden, isn't it?
I'm based in Sweden now.
You're based in Sweden. The farm, beautiful Almvik farm. Not so far from main city in Sweden.
No, it's 50 kilometers from Stockholm, but it's in the woods. It's you wouldn't know that you are that close to Stockholm. If you could spend a couple of years in our village without ever thinking that there any big city nearby.
Yeah, and the farm is connected to the International Society of for Krishna Consciousness.
Yeah.
Nice, and there are a lot of Bhakti Yogis practicing mantra meditation in the woods. Beautiful nature connected to Mother Nature.
Well, that's a good place to practice mantra meditation. It's a traditional way. Going to the woods.
Yes, and then there is also authentic Hatha Yogi there, Jayananda Prabhu. So if you want to practice also with him, I think that he will show you some tricks and some of his vast knowledge of yoga. Thank you so much. We'll post the links to your webpage and also the how to get your wonderful book.
Okay.
Yes, and keep on the good work. I'm looking forward to so many new scientific papers, but also some new yoga stuff from you.
Okay. Thanks for the encouraging words.
Thank you for being our guest today in League of Yogis live talk. Here's your host, Dhira Nitai from Lion Temple in Bavarian Forest. So from forest to forest, good evening to Sweden and Almvik Farm.
Yeah. Good night. Sleep well.
Good night.